What makes Venezuela different from other collapse scenarios is that this wasn't a war. The buildings stayed standing. The roads remained intact, the infrastructure existed. But the economy collapsed so completely that none of it mattered. Supermarket shelves went empty, pharmacies ran out of basic medications. The power grid failed for days at a time, and over 7 million Venezuelans fled their own country. The preppers who saw this coming, who stockpiled the right items before the crisis accelerated, they survived. Many of them got out, and the ones who documented their experiences left behind a roadmap for the rest of us. Over the past several weeks, I've gone through Human Rights Watch reports, United Nations refugee data, IMF economic assessments, and first-hand accounts from Venezuelan immigrants. What I found is a consistent pattern. The families who stockpiled these 11 specific items fared dramatically better than those who didn't. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is what actually worked when a modern nation collapsed. Before we get into the list, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced shortages in your area? Empty shelves, price spikes, items you couldn't find? Drop it in the comments because your observations might help someone else prepare for what's coming. Let's get into it. Item number 1, rice and dried beans. When Venezuela's economy started sliding in 2014, the families who survived understood one brutal truth. Calories matter more than variety when everything falls apart around you. Rice and beans became the backbone of survival for millions, and these two items topped every serious prepper's stockpile list for good reason. Combined together, they form a complete protein that provides every essential amino acid your body needs to function. This combination has sustained populations through famines and wars and economic collapses throughout history, and Venezuela proved its value all over again. The government implemented food rationing cards called Tarjeta de Abastecimiento and assigned shoppers specific days to purchase based on their ID numbers. Even with rationing cards in hand, shelves sat empty more often than not. Rice prices on the black market climbed to 20 times the official government rate, and families without stockpiles found themselves unable to afford what little remained available. Survivors consistently report that families who stockpiled 6 to 12 months of rice and beans before the crisis accelerated found themselves in a completely different situation than their desperate neighbors. They weren't standing in lines for hours hoping stores might have something left. They weren't watching their children go hungry while searching empty shelves. Item number 2, cooking oil. Cooking oil became one of the most desperately sought commodities during the crisis years, and families who failed to stockpile discovered just how miserable survival becomes without this basic kitchen staple that most people take completely for granted. You can store all the rice and beans and flour you want, but without cooking oil, your options for preparing those foods collapse down to boiling and nothing else. Frying and sauteing and baking with any richness all disappear from your life. When you're already stressed and scared and watching your country fall apart, eating nothing but boiled food adds another layer of psychological misery to an already desperate situation. The government attempted price controls on cooking oil and achieved exactly the opposite of what they intended. Producers couldn't cover their costs at controlled prices, so they stopped producing. Importers couldn't profit from bringing oil into the country, so they stopped importing. Shelves went bare while officials blamed hoarding and speculation instead of acknowledging their policies had created the shortage. Smuggling networks emerged to transport cooking oil across the Colombian border where it could sell at actual market prices. People risked arrest and violence to move bottles of cooking oil internationally because the profit justified the danger. and that tells you everything about how valuable this simple product became. Cooking oil also proved valuable for barter when currency became worthless. Unlike bulky items, bottles are easy to transport and divide into smaller quantities for trade. A family with extra cooking oil could obtain medications or hygiene products or other necessities they lacked. Those without stockpiles had nothing to offer when they needed something desperately and cash no longer worked. Item number 3. Powdered milk. When the power grid becomes unreliable, fresh milk becomes impossible to obtain or store. Refrigeration fails during every blackout and supply chains collapse entirely during extended outages. Families with young children faced a nutritional crisis that powdered milk stockpiles could have prevented, but most people never thought to prepare for this specific scenario. Venezuelan preppers who stockpiled powdered milk understood something others learned too late through painful experience. Children and elderly family members have nutritional needs that basic staples like rice and beans simply cannot meet no matter how much you store. Growing bodies and aging bodies require calcium and specific proteins and vitamins that powdered milk provides in shelf-stable form, independent of electricity. UNICEF documented the child malnutrition crisis that emerged during the collapse in devastating detail. Children arrived at hospitals with conditions Venezuelan doctors hadn't seen in decades. Kwashiorkor and marasmus and protein-energy malnutrition that stunts growth and damages organs and causes permanent developmental harm showed up in a country that had been wealthy just years earlier. The emotional accounts from survivors become almost unbearable when children enter the picture. Parents describe going without food themselves so their children could have milk. They describe trading treasured possessions for a single can of powdered milk because their baby needed it to survive another week. Item number 4. Medications and medical supplies. The Venezuelan healthcare collapse killed people who should have survived with basic medical care. Diabetics died because insulin disappeared from pharmacies. Heart patients died because blood pressure medications vanished from shelves. Cancer patients died because chemotherapy drugs simply ran out. The preppers who stockpiled medications saved their own lives and the lives of everyone in their families who depended on daily medicine. The Venezuelan Pharmaceutical Federation reported an 85% shortage of medications at the crisis peak. Walking into a pharmacy meant finding almost nothing on the shelves. Hospitals turned away patients because they had no supplies to treat them with. Doctors performed surgeries without adequate anesthesia because nothing else existed anywhere in the system. Human Rights Watch documented this nightmare extensively through survivor interviews. Patients showing up at hospitals were told to bring their own supplies if they wanted treatment. Gloves and gauze and syringes and medications all had to come from the patient because the hospital had nothing. Doctors Without Borders set up operations in Venezuela to treat a population that had enjoyed modern healthcare just years earlier. What Venezuelan preppers learned through this experience is that medications must be acquired before any crisis makes them unavailable. Once shortages hit, no amount of money buys what simply doesn't exist anymore. Families with chronic conditions who had stockpiled essential medications survived the collapse. Those who assumed pharmacies would always have what they needed often didn't make it through. Item number 5. Water storage and purification. When the power grid failed across Venezuela in March 2019, water stopped flowing from every tap in the country. Electric pumps that moved water through the municipal system went silent without power. Treatment plants shut down completely. Millions of people suddenly had nothing safe to drink and no idea when service might return. That blackout lasted nearly a week in some areas and affected an estimated 20 million people simultaneously. Hospitals without running water were forced to close their doors or dramatically limit operations. Families without stored water faced an impossible choice between dangerous dehydration and drinking from contaminated sources that would make them sick. Venezuelan preppers who had invested in water storage containers survived this period in fundamentally better condition than their unprepared neighbors all around them. Those with large containers filled and ready could shelter safely in place while maintaining basic hygiene and continuing to cook and clean. Those without storage joined desperate lines at government water trucks and competed with thousands of equally desperate neighbors for extremely limited supplies. The water crisis didn't end when the March 2019 blackout finally lifted. Subsequent years brought continued rolling blackouts and ongoing infrastructure failures throughout the system. Running water became completely unreliable in many areas and sometimes disappeared for weeks at a time with no warning. Families adapted by storing water obsessively whenever it flowed. Water purification tablets and filters became extremely valuable commodities. Families collected rainwater and river water when municipal supplies failed, but drinking untreated water risked serious illness that could prove fatal without medical care. Those with purification capability survived. Those without faced terrible choices between different ways of suffering. Item number 6. Cash in both local and foreign currency. Venezuela experienced one of the worst hyperinflation episodes in modern recorded history, and families who kept their savings in bolivars watched helplessly as their entire life's wealth evaporated into nothing. Those who converted to US dollars before the collapse preserved everything they had worked for. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. The International Monetary Fund estimated inflation exceeded 1,000,000% in 2018 alone. Something costing 1 bolivar in January cost 10,000 bolivars by December of the same year. The government redenominated the currency multiple times and slashed zeros off the bills because the numbers had grown too large to function in daily transactions. Families who recognized what was happening converted their bolivar savings to US dollars as quickly as they possibly could. Black market currency exchanges operated throughout the country and offered rates that worsened daily but still preserved value compared to holding worthless bolivars. Those who made this conversion early watched their neighbors' savings disappear while their own retained actual purchasing power. Physical cash became essential during blackouts when electronic payment systems failed completely. Card readers don't work without electricity, and digital dollars sitting in foreign accounts can't buy groceries when the power goes out. Small denominations proved most useful because making change for a $100 bill was often impossible in street transactions. By 2019 and 2020, even the Venezuelan government started accepting US dollars for some services, effectively admitting their own currency had failed completely. The lesson for preppers everywhere is that currency is only a promise and governments break promises. Physical cash in stable currencies provides protection when your own government's money becomes worthless paper. Item number 7. Fuel and fuel storage. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the entire planet, and during the crisis Venezuelans waited in line for days just to buy gasoline for their cars. That absurd contradiction tells you everything about how completely the country's systems had broken down at every level. The fuel crisis emerged from multiple failures combining simultaneously. Refineries fell into disrepair after years of mismanagement and zero investment in maintenance. International sanctions complicated imports of refined petroleum products. The general economic collapse meant that even when fuel existed somewhere, the distribution systems to move it around the country had stopped functioning. Government rationing attempted to manage the shortage, but demand vastly exceeded any available supply. Lines at gas stations stretched for blocks and sometimes for miles in every direction. Some Venezuelans reported waiting 24 hours or longer for fuel, sleeping in their cars overnight and hoping they would reach the pump before supplies ran dry. Venezuelan preppers who stockpiled fuel before these shortages began faced a completely different reality than everyone around them. They could run generators during the blackouts that left millions sitting in darkness. They could drive to obtain supplies or evacuate their families if staying became too dangerous. Diversifying power sources between generators and solar provided resilience that depending on fuel alone couldn't offer. Item number 8. Portable power including generators and solar. The March 2019 blackout affected an estimated 20 million Venezuelans simultaneously, and when the power died, everything about modern life stopped with it. Refrigerators full of food began spoiling within hours. Medications requiring cold storage failed and became useless. Communication devices went dark. Families without backup power faced days of complete uncertainty with no information and no way to help themselves. Venezuelan preppers who invested in generators before the crisis maintained capabilities that their neighbors completely lost. Food stayed cold in working refrigerators. Medical equipment kept running for family members who needed it. Phones could charge to communicate with relatives or receive news about what was happening. During a multi-day blackout in a collapsing country, these weren't conveniences but genuine survival advantages. The challenge with generators comes down to fuel dependency. Running a generator continuously burns through fuel supplies rapidly, and when fuel becomes rationed or unavailable, generator owners eventually face the same powerless situation as everyone else. Some families ran generators only a few hours daily to stretch limited fuel supplies, prioritizing refrigeration during the hottest afternoon hours and charging devices in short bursts. Solar panels offered an alternative that didn't depend on scarce fuel at all. Panels charging battery banks provided ongoing power without consuming anything. The output was typically lower than generator power and often only sufficient for charging devices and running small appliances, but sustainability during extended outages proved extremely valuable. Many Venezuelan families improvised backup power using car batteries, charging them whenever electricity was available and using inverters to run small devices during outages. Item number 9. Hygiene and sanitation supplies. Toilet paper became the iconic symbol of Venezuelan shortages and made international headlines that illustrated just how completely basic supply chains had collapsed. But the hygiene crisis extended far beyond toilet paper and affected health and dignity and daily life for millions of people throughout the country. The shortages started appearing in 2013 and 2014, early enough that preppers who paid attention had plenty of time to stockpile before things got truly desperate. Toilet paper lines made global news with images of Venezuelans waiting hours for a chance to buy just a few rolls. The government launched investigations into alleged hoarding rather than acknowledging their economic policies had created the problem. Soap and toothpaste and shampoo and deodorant and feminine hygiene products all became increasingly scarce as the crisis deepened month after month. Domestic production collapsed because manufacturers couldn't obtain raw materials or operate profitably under price controls. Imports dried up because the government lacked foreign currency to pay for them. The health implications of hygiene shortages went far beyond simple discomfort. Sanitation failures contribute directly to disease spread in any population. Lack of soap increases infection rates significantly. Inadequate feminine hygiene creates serious health problems for women. Families without diapers for infants face daily crises that compounded every other challenge they were already struggling to manage. Smuggling networks transported hygiene products across the Colombian border for sale at market prices, and that tells you how valuable basic items like toilet paper and soap had become. Venezuelan preppers who stockpiled hygiene supplies maintained normalcy and dignity while their neighbors suffered. They could also trade extras for food or medicine when currency stopped working entirely. Item number 10. Barter goods including coffee. When currency fails completely, barter economies emerge to replace normal commerce. The Venezuelans who understood this reality stockpiled trade goods before the crisis accelerated, giving themselves purchasing power that didn't depend on worthless bolivars sitting in bank accounts. Coffee became serious barter currency throughout Venezuela during the crisis years. This makes complete sense when you understand the culture. Coffee is a daily ritual deeply embedded in Venezuelan social and family life. When coffee disappeared from stores, the craving didn't disappear with it. Families who had stockpiled coffee could trade it for almost anything because desperate neighbors would pay premium prices for something they'd taken for granted their entire lives. Cigarettes functioned as barter currency for the same reason they've worked that way in prisons and war zones and economic collapses throughout recorded history. Addiction maintains demand regardless of external circumstances. Individual cigarettes work perfectly for small transactions. The product is lightweight and portable and has a long shelf life when stored properly. Venezuelan preppers who stockpiled cigarettes, even though they did and personally smoke, held tradable assets that maintained value throughout the entire collapse. Alcohol served multiple purposes beyond pure barter value. Sealed bottles of liquor store indefinitely and provide long-term trade goods whenever needed. High-proof alcohol works as an antiseptic when medical supplies run short. And in a crisis stretching from months into years, the psychological value of an occasional drink shouldn't be dismissed. Number 11. Security and self-defense. Crime rates exploded throughout Venezuela as the crisis deepened. Kidnapping and home invasion and robbery and murder all increased dramatically as economic desperation combined with police corruption and complete government dysfunction. The preppers who survived didn't just stockpile supplies. They stockpiled the means to protect those supplies and keep their families safe. Venezuela became one of the most dangerous countries in the entire Western Hemisphere during the crisis years, with murder rates ranking among the highest anywhere in the world. Kidnapping for ransom increased as criminal organizations recognized that desperate families would pay anything to recover loved ones. Home invasions targeted anyone suspected of having food or cash or valuables worth stealing. The security measures Venezuelan preppers implemented went beyond weapons alone. Reinforced doors and upgraded locks made home invasion more difficult for criminals. Window bars prevented easy entry points. Guard dogs provided both deterrence and early warning of approaching threats. Neighborhood watch groups formed as communities recognized that collective security protected everyone better than individual isolation. Keeping supplies hidden became a critical survival strategy. Families who displayed any sign of wealth or abundance attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention from desperate and dangerous people. Those who maintained low profiles and didn't advertise their preparations faced significantly lower risk of being targeted for robbery or home invasion. Travel became genuinely dangerous throughout the country, particularly after dark when criminals operated more freely. Venezuelans learned to move in groups whenever possible and avoid unnecessary trips outside their neighborhoods. Those who had to travel for work planned routes carefully and stayed constantly alert for signs of trouble ahead. Venezuela proves that collapse happens faster than anyone expects it to. A wealthy modern nation with the world's largest oil reserves descended into humanitarian crisis within approximately 5 years. The building stayed standing and the infrastructure remained physically intact, but the systems that make modern life function failed completely at every level. The 11 items Venezuelan preppers stockpiled represent a blueprint that was tested under real collapse conditions. Rice and beans for calories, cooking oil for food preparation, powdered milk for children and elderly family members, medications for health emergencies, water storage for the most basic human need, cash and stable currencies to preserve wealth, fuel for power and transportation, generators and solar for electrical independence, hygiene supplies for health and basic dignity, barter goods for trade when money stops working, and security measures to protect everything else you've prepared. This isn't theory or speculation. This is exactly what worked when a modern nation collapsed around the people living there. Thanks for watching.